Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today I am coming to you with the first part of a three-part series on how I construct my journals. I've had quite a number of people ask me to do this type of thing over the past year or so I finally gotten around to filming my process pretty much beginning to end. In this first session, I am going to focus on how I construct a fabric spine by hand, and this is the exact journal that I will be demonstrating throughout my series. So today we are going to look at spine construction. In the second session, I will be focusing on how I put together my pages, how I sew in my signatures, and then in the third session, I will glue my signature block to my cover and finish off my inside covers. So I hope you stay tuned for my series. I'm pretty excited about it. And if you have any questions along the way, just leave me a comment. Let's get started. Okay, so my first step in creating a journal usually is to select my book cover. I do this because I want to know what size I'm working with, and it kind of sets the direction of the journal a lot of times. So for this particular journal, I selected this smallish cover, and it is just shy of 4 inches wide by about 6 1/8 tall. Now the spine on this one was quite narrow and it had cracked from the covers. It wasn't usable for me, and so I decided I would make my own spine. So once I select my cover, I set it aside and then work on all of my pages because I want to make sure that I have an adequate width for my spine. And so I always wait until I have all my pages done and see how fat I stuff those full of ephemera and things before I construct my spine. I have already done that, and I know I want a 1 3/4 inch wide spine for this journal. In working with the covers, I separate them from the book block if that's necessary. Sometimes they're already loose. And then these inside edges, I sometimes cut them really cleanly. Just depends on what I'm doing. In this case, I wanted to just leave a little bit of the fringe hanging there and have the papers kind of show through. Sometimes I like a little bit of a grufty edge there, and that's what I did with this one. The other thing I always do when I'm using an old book cover is to give it a good scrub. Sometimes they come in really nice, clean shape, and sometimes they're very grimy and dirty, but whatever the case, I always give them a good wipe with this antibacterial wipe. I just don't like to work with a grimy cover. I don't mind. I love the old marks. I love the watermarks, the wear, all of that, but I just like to know that I'm working with a nice clean surface. The one thing I wanted to mention is sometimes you do have to be careful about color removal. Now this one is beige and it's a tight weave, so it really worked quite well, giving it a nice good scrub. But sometimes, like this one I have here, especially if it's a red book cover, if you scrub too vigorously, it's going to pull off some of that color. So that's something to keep in mind. I usually do a little test spot on the inside somewhere, and if I see that it's lifting off, I'm still going to scrub it, but I'll just be a little bit more careful. Okay, so once I have my covers, the next step is to choose a fabric for my spine. And so for this particular one, I chose this. It's kind of a tapestry fabric, kind of an upholstery weight fabric, I would say. And I chose this one because it's got a really nice match of the creams and that burgundy in there. It also has some blues, and a lot of my pages in my journal have some blues as well. So in determining the size for this fabric piece, I first think about whether I want to wrap it around the outside of the cover or wrap it to the inside. Now on this particular one, I am going to be wrapping it to the inside. I'm doing that because I love this leather, red leather strip on there, and I don't want to cover that up. So at some point in the future, I may do an add-on to this series where I show you how I do a spine where I wrap it to the outside, because I do the internal workings a little bit different on that one. let's talk about the sizing on this. For the height, I usually cut it maybe 1/8 of an inch longer top and bottom than my book cover, just so it sticks out of the edge a little bit and it covers up the cardboard spine that I will be constructing. And then for the width, I've got my 1 3/4 inch spine, and then I usually add about 1 inch or so to wrap around to the inside on each side. So that's 3 3/4 inches wide is what I've got for my width. Okay, so the next step is to find a piece of cardboard or chipboard for your spine. And so I just found this piece in my stash. It's like a kind of a chipboard piece. The first thing I do with my piece of cardboard is to give it a little bend and determine which way I want to have it facing. So this one, I already made sure it was the right way. When I bend it this way, there's a lot of resistance. And when I bend it this way, it bends much more easily. And so I want to make sure that the easy bend, it goes top to bottom. Because when I put this together, I always like to have maybe a little bit of a curve on my spine. And this just makes it easier. It's not so rigid when you're holding it in your hand. So I am going to be using it this way. Now, determining the size of my cardboard piece. I want my cardboard piece to be exactly the same height as my front and back cover. So it's a nice continuous flow and it's all the same height. What I usually do is to just place one of the book boards on here. I'll line up the top. Let me get this in the camera. Line up the top and then just mark across the bottom. And then I will take that to my paper cutter and cut it. So let's see if we can get that in on camera here. Okay. Got my mark there. Okay. I keep bending it to make sure I have it the right direction. Then I put it back on here and then just give it a little feel. And it's just a little bit long, so I'm going to go give it another trim. All right, let's try it again. I just do this by touch. I just kind of feel on both ends. Yep, it feels exactly the same height. Okay, so now for my width. Like I mentioned, 1 3/4 inch spine. And for this, I usually do either like a 5/8 or a 3/4 inch overlap with the book cover. So for this one, I'm going to do a 3/4 inch. My red strip here is exactly 3/4, so that'll be a good guideline. And so I'm going to add to my 1 3/4, I'm going to add 3/4 for the front and 3/4 for the back. So the total width will be 3 1/4 inches wide. Now that's a little bit different than this. It's a little bit less. And the reason I do that is when I've got this glued onto the inside of my cover, I don't want the fabric piece and the cardboard to end up in exactly the same spot because it makes a really kind of a deep drop off or ridge, especially if your fabric is thick. And so I kind of want to step it down a little bit to the cover. So this is about 1/4 inch wider than my cardboard piece. And eventually I will be putting a piece of tape over that for reinforcement and to just make that transition a little bit smoother, but that's kind of my thinking on that. Okay, so I need this 3 1/4 inches wide, so I'm going to cut that. Hopefully I'm not banging around too much here. Okay, so 3 1/4. Cut that. I just keep reinforcing everything with myself so I don't make any mistakes. So I've got these all lined up where I want them. My next step will be to take my fabric piece and glue it down to my cardboard. Now for this, I use either PVA glue or Fabri-Tac. And for today's video, I'm going to use Fabri-Tac because it does dry much faster. But I found that both methods work quite well. I tend to use Fabri-Tac with thicker fabrics because it's kind of goopy and it just sinks into the fabric better, and I don't have to worry about it seeping through. Now, if I've got a thinner fabric, I will either back it with some interfacing so that the glue doesn't seep through, or use the PVA because I can put a nice thin coat on there, and I usually don't have any trouble with that seeping through and leaving marks on the fabric. I'm going to get something to put underneath here so I don't get glue all over my surface. Okay, I've got a piece of paper. So I am just going to cover this with my Fabri-Tac. Got a brand new bottle, so we should be in good shape here. I just give it a nice generous coat. I make sure I get to the edges really well. And I will be spreading this out too. Okay, I like to use these silicone brushes and just spread it out really nice so I get to the edges. Okay, move my messy paper. Now I think the best way to do this is to lay that down and then lay this over the top so I've got it exactly where I want it. Now Fabri-Tac, both Fabri-Tac and PVA, you've got a little bit of time to wiggle things around. But with the Fabri-Tac, you know, once you have it down, you don't want to be moving it too many places. One of my favorite tools is my trusty brayer. I use that a lot when I'm gluing, and I just like to kind of burnish that down and make sure there's good contact everywhere. The thing with Fabri-Tac is it's really cool to the touch, the surfaces of your paper, and so you can kind of tell when it's dry by the temperature. So I am just going to leave this sit for a minute or two to dry, and then we will come back for the next step. Okay, I think our glue is dry enough so that we can move on to the next step. Now, because I am on camera, I forgot a step, which is to score where I want to make my folds for my hinges. It works a lot easier to score this cardboard before you apply your fabric, because I would just put it on my scoreboard and score it and be done. But since I didn't do that, I am just going to mark a line and score it afterward by hand using my ruler. So I'm going to go 3/4 on this side and then 3/4 in on this side. And then here, 3/4 and 3/4. I'm just going to put a line there. Okay, and then I will, now if you don't have a cutting or a scoreboard, this is the method that you could use to score your cardboard. You just get a nice cleaner line by scoring it first. So now we will take our little scoring tool and just score that line. And then this one. so now I'm just going to take each of these sides and fold them in on the score line. So you can see it's already forming our 3/4 inch spine. And then if we take one of our, this is my front cover, we take one of our covers, this is what we're going to have, and that's going to get glued to the inside. So I'm just going to give these another fold. Before we glue them in, I just want to finish off the top and bottom of my spine with some lace. Now this is not necessary, but just depending on what your cardboard looks like, sometimes, you know, if you look from the top, you can see that little strip of cardboard in there. So I like to make sure that's covered, and so a lot of times I'll take a strip of lace and glue that and sandwich that cardboard in between the two layers, and then you can't see that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm using this little piece of lace. I have had this since I started making journals, and this is all I have left. So this is what I'm going to use today, and I'll have just enough to finish off this book, and then I'll have to find another one. But I just love the color of it. It's a beautiful lace, and it's got this scalloped edge on top, so I like to put that toward the top. It's just nice to know you've got a pretty piece of lace on the inside, even though you don't see most of it. So I am going to cut this piece the length of my cardboard, just a little bit beyond that. And then another piece for the bottom. One little snippet to use somewhere. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So to glue these in, I am going to use my art glitter glue, and I put mine in this little bottle. This is the tip that came with my art glitter glue bottle, and I just keep refilling this little one. It's much handier to use than a larger bottle. So what I'm going to do is I want to extend this just a little bit beyond my fabric, like that. So I'm going to run a bead of glue across the top of my cardboard and then across the top of my fabric so that we can pinch that cardboard in between the two layers. Okay, and then I will finish gluing the rest of it after I get this in place. So let's So I'm just kind of pinching these two so I don't see my cardboard anywhere across the top. And then I can finish gluing the rest of it. That I can be a little more sloppy because that's all going to be hidden on the inside. Just want to make sure it's down good. Okay, and then I will do the same for this side. And the nice thing about art glitter glue is it does dry clear, so you do not see it. Okay, I'm going to flip this around to make sure I'm coming over the top edge. Okay. Oh, I think I don't want any floppy edges down here, so I'm gonna make sure I've got it all the way to the bottom. And on that side, I think I did pretty good. So this is my outside spine. This is my top. I know I want this little red piece at the top. That's how I know. And I've got that blue on the bottom. Okay. So now we are ready to glue our spine to our book covers. So for this next step, I will again be using my Fabri-Tac glue, and we will be gluing our edges to our covers. So for lining this up, I always check to make sure I've just got a little bit of an edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch, that extends beyond the front cover. I do that for a couple of reasons. The first is I like to see a little bit of that spine fabric on the front. And then also I want to make sure that this isn't, back in this position, because that's not a very nice look. So by having it extended, it protects that front edge, and I just think it gives it a nicer look. So I kind of get that positioned where I want it. And then I turn it over and just kind of loosely mark where I want my glue to go. I don't mind if I get it beyond the edge of this fabric, because this is all going to be covered anyway, but it just kind of gives me an indication of where to put it here, and I like to put it on the book cover rather than on this piece. It just is neater, seems to work better. I don't get it in spots where I don't want it. I've got that marked, and I'm just going to get my piece of paper so I don't make a mess here. And I'm just going to add my glue. I'm just going to go beyond my pencil mark a little bit to make sure I've got it everywhere. And then this raw edge, I really make sure I've got plenty there, because I want that down good against the fabric. So you can see I'm putting a generous amount on here. I can do that because of the thickness of my fabric. If my fabric was a little bit thinner, I probably would not put quite that much on. I'm just going to spread it to the edges. And then maybe take a little bit of this excess off of there. But I just put plenty on because I do want, this is an important piece of the construction, and I want it to stick well. Okay, make sure you've got the right cover if there is a difference between your front and back. And then I'm just going to place this like that, turn it around, and then make sure I've got it exactly where I want it, top to bottom, front to back. That looks pretty good. I got a little glue on there, so I gotta make sure I get that wiped off. That's the one nice thing about Fabri-Tac, that just kind of rolls off nicely. Now I'm going to bend this, and just to make sure I've got that where I want it. Okay. So now I usually clamp this to dry, so I'm going to put a clamp there, a clamp there. The other thing you could do, which I do sometimes also, is just lay it out and put a heavy book on top, just so there's good contact and you can leave it to dry. Okay, I am going to let that dry for a little bit, and then I will be back. I took the clamps off of my spine, and it looks like the glue is dried enough, so we can move on to our back cover. And this step is exactly the same as the front cover. So I'm just going to line this up visually where I like it. And then I'm going to kind of just check to make sure it's lined up with the front cover, so we're not wonky anywhere. I've got my little overhang across the top. So I'm going to flip that around. And then again, mark loosely where I want to put my glue. And then we will add our glue. And then I will spread it out again with my little brush here. I'm just going to bring it across that line a little bit to make sure I've got my fabric covered. And then, let's see. I think again I will just kind of place this along my pencil line and then adjust on this side as need be. Okay, and I think this time I will just lay that down and find a nice heavy book and lay that on top and let it dry. So I removed my book and I think the glue is adequately dry to move on to the next step. This is what it looks like so far on the inside, and this is the outside, and I think it's looking pretty good. And so I've got one more step I'd like to show you in this session. That is to add some bookbinding tape to the inside where my fabric and cardboard meet my cover. And the reason I do this, I think I mentioned it earlier, but we've got these kind of step downs here, and I just like to ease that transition a little bit by covering that with the tape, and it just makes it a little bit smoother. Now eventually, this inside cover is not very pretty right now, but eventually it will be, and I will be covering the inside covers with some decorative paper, so that'll cover up all of my inner workings. And also I have my book block with fabric that I will be placing in here as well. Okay, so for this step, I'm going to take my bookbinding tape. Now this tape comes in widths 1, 2, and 3 inches wide. I do get this on Amazon, and I've got it listed in my favorite things Amazon list in the description of this video. So I'm going to use 1 inch today. I think that'll be adequate. It comes in different colors too. This is a gray, I've got black. Those are the two main colors that I work with. So what I do is I pull this out. It's very, very sticky, so you want to put the sticky side up while you're working with it. And I want to lay this along here and not go all the way to the top of my book cover because I don't want it to be visible. And then, so I leave maybe 1/8 or a little bit more gap at the top and then on the bottom as well. And then I just come down here and cut that where I want it. And then I'm going to flip this over and position that, I think, right about there so it covers all the parts that I want it to cover. And then I'm just going to, starting in the middle where this biggest drop off is, I'm just going to press that down with my finger and then move to the outside on either side. And that'll just strengthen this whole seam a bit and just make it a lot smoother. Okay, and then I will do the same for the back. Sometimes I get this sticky tape all over the place, curled up on itself, and I have to start over. Okay, so I'm going to cut this right about there. I think that's a little bit longer than I want. I'm going to cut that a little bit more just to make sure, because my end paper or my inside cover papers, I don't take to the edge. I bring that up a little bit, kind of where this paper is. So I just want to make sure this doesn't go beyond that line. Okay, stick that down. And again, just rub. I've got a lot of tools in my craft room, but I think my favorite tool are my hands. They all seem to work best for most jobs. So there we go. So we've got our inside cover taped up, and we are all set for the next step. So in the next session of this series, I will be showing you how I stitch my signatures together to form the book block. I hope you stay tuned for that one. Thanks for being with me today, and until next time, bye-bye.